y'all, check this out. BCM Raider here, bringing you another Commander deck tech. Today we're looking at Helga, Skittish Seer. This is a all-in ramp deck, and we're going to produce as much mana as possible to cast very large, dumb creatures. Helga has a activated ability of adding X mana of one color, where X is Helga's power. We can only spend this mana to cast creature spells with mana value 4 or greater, or with X in their cost. But whenever we cast a creature with mana value 4 or greater, we get to draw a card, gain 1 life, and put a +1 counter on Helga. So Helga, if we use her activated ability, is going to scale every single time we cast these large creatures with mana cost 4 or greater. So let's get right into it. First up is all the ramp creatures. So we have our Birds of Paradise, our Delighted Halfling. This is a very powerful mana dork. It'll add a colorless mana, or it'll add 1 mana of any color. If we cast it on a legendary spell, that spell can't be countered. Now we have Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, Arbor Elf, Allosaurus Shepherd. This is going to be very beneficial because not only does Allosaurus Shepherd can't be countered, our green spells can't be countered. And if we have enough mana, we are going to turn every single elf creature we control into a 5/5 dinosaur. Now we have our Finhorn Elves and Priest of Titania. Priest of Titania is going to add 1 green mana for each elf on the battlefield. Now we have Fanatic of Ronus. This is a very good ramp creature. If we control a creature with power 4 or greater, it will add 4 green mana. Otherwise, it'll just tap for 1 green. But if Fanatic of Ronus happens to go to the graveyard, we can eternalize this and bring it back as a 4/4 black zombie. Now we have Azusa, Lost But Seeking, because we're going to be wanting to play as many lands as possible and produce as much mana as possible. Now we have Dryad of the Elysian Grove. Apart from having additional land drops each turn, lands we control will produce the color we definitely need. Now we have Inga and Asika. This is a fun one. She has a static effect where every single creature will have vigilance and can tap for any colored mana that we can cast creature spells with. But whenever we cast a creature spell, if 3 or more mana was used from creatures, we get to draw a card. It's also a good blocker too. Now we have Destiny Spinner. Destiny Spinner is going to ensure that all our creature spells will resolve by not being able to be countered. But if we have enough lands, we can turn those lands into creatures with trample and haste, where its power will be the number of enchantments we control. Now we have Forgotten Agent. Whenever any player casts a spell, we're going to put a +1 counter on Forgotten Agent. And then every single upkeep, we can choose to move those +1 counters to other creatures to make them bigger. Now we have Fierce Empath. Fierce Empath, when it enters the battlefield, we're going to search our library for any creature with mana cost 6 or greater. So this little 3-drop 1/1 elf is going to help us go and find our very large creatures that we're going to use to end the game. First up is Amareth the Lustrous. This is a flying 6/6 dragon. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under our control, we get to look at the top card of our library. If it shares a type with that permanent, we can reveal that card and put that card into our hand. Now we have Nyx Bloom Ancient. Nyx Bloom Ancient is going to be responsible for producing as much mana as possible, because every single permanent that taps for mana it will tap 3 times that much instead. Now we have Cultivator Colossus. This card's amazing. Its power and toughness are equal to the lands we control, but when Cultivator Colossus enters the battlefield, we can put a land card from our hand onto the battlefield tapped, and if we do, we get to draw a card. Then we repeat this process. So ultimately, we can put as many lands on the battlefield as possible. Now we have Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite. Really don't need to say too much more about this card. Our creatures are going to get bigger by 2. All our opponent's creatures are going to get -2/-2. So if your opponents are on some kind of token strategy, all those creatures are going to die almost immediately. And of course, we have Craterhoof Behemoth. That way we can just go get this. If we have enough creatures out, we can just end games very quickly. Now we have a large X spell. We have Hydroid Krasis. It's going to enter the battlefield with X +1 counters on it. It also has flying and trample, but when we cast this, we're going to gain half X life and draw half X cards rounded down each time. So if we pump 16 mana into Hydroid Krasis, 18 total, we would draw 8 cards and gain 8 life. Now we have Coma, Cosmos Serpent. This spell can't be countered on its own. It's a 6/6, and every single upkeep, we're going to create a 3/3 Serpent token. And we're going to use these Serpent tokens to either tap down a opponent's permanent and shut off its activated ability, or protect Coma by giving it indestructible. Now we have Blightsteel Colossus. This is very straightforward. Blightsteel Colossus hits you, you lose the game. It's also very difficult to get rid of. Now we have Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. Just by casting this, you get to exile 2 permanents, and if you get to attack with this thing, you're going to exile the top 20 cards of that defending player's library. Now we have Kozilek, Butcher of Truth. Just by casting this, we get to draw 4 cards. It has Annihilator 4, so when Kozilek attacks, the defending player has to sacrifice 4 permanents, and if Kozilek would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, we get to shuffle it and our entire graveyard back in. Now we have the original Ulamog, the Infinite Gyre. Same thing, when we cast Ulamog, we get to destroy any permanent we want. It also has Annihilator 4. This one is indestructible itself, however. It's just a very powerful big creature. Okay, let's get into the planeswalkers that are going to help us out. Of course, we have Nissa, who shakes the world. She's going to provide a lot of mana for us by having all our forests add a additional green mana. We can put 3 counters on a land. It'll become a 3/3 creature with vigilance and haste. And if we get the emblem Nissa, we get to go search for every single forest card in our entire deck and put it onto the battlefield. And then land creatures are indestructible for the rest of the game. Now we have Kiora, Behemoth Beckoner. I know, it's the squiggly version. But we get to minus Kiora and untap any permanent we want. That's going to be very beneficial if we have certain lands that produce more than 1 mana. Now we have Vivian, Monster's Advocate. We get to look at the top card of our library at any time, and we can cast creature spells from the top of our library. With our +1, we get to create 3/3 beast tokens with our choice of Vigilance, Reach, or Trample. And then if we -2, when we cast our next creature spell, we get to search our library for a creature card with lesser converted mana cost than the initial casted creature and put that creature on the battlefield. So if we ramp very hard early on and we -2 Vivian and we cast Ulamog, let's say, we get to go search for any creature with a lower mana cost and put that creature on the battlefield. And that's going to be really, really fun. And just for some flavor, we have Karn Liberated. This is going to deal with cards in our opponent's hand or exiling permanents that are really hindering us. We're almost never going to restart the game because no one ever likes doing that. Okay, let's get into the enchantments. Because we're all-in ramp deck, we're playing land tax. So why not thin your deck out of all your basics when you need it to? Okay, now we have Utopia Sprawl. We're going to enchant a forest with this, and we're going to choose a color. So our basic forest, or whatever forest land, is going to provide a additional colored mana. Similar to that, we have Fertile Ground. Now we have Splunking. When Splunking enters the battlefield, we get the draw card and put a land from our hand on the battlefield. But lands we control will enter untapped. And that's going to be the important thing. Now we have Path of Discovery. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, we get to explore. So either that creature is going to get bigger by putting a +1 counter on it, or if it's a land, that land card will be in our hand. Okay, let's get into the artifacts. First up is Amulet of Vigor. This is going to ensure that every single permanent entering the battlefield is untapped. We can also use this with our very specific lands to produce additional mana. But I'll get to that in just a second. So we have Soul Ring. We have our Arcane Signet. Our Talisman of Curiosity. Talisman of Progress. Talisman of Unity. Our Felwar Stone. And our Chromatic Lantern. We are running a very decent amount of mana dorks and mana rocks. That way we can produce as much mana as possible. And to make our bigger spells even easier to cast, we have our Emerald Medallion, our Sapphire Medallion, and our Pearl Medallion. Now we have some equipment for all these creatures that are going to help us out. So we have Shadow Spear. Shadow Spear, I think, is very powerful. The equipped creature will get +1/+1 trample and lifelink. So if it's a very large creature, we're going to gain a lot of life. And trample is very important for pushing through damage. That way our opponents can't just throw little chump blockers in front of it. But Shadow Spear has a very unique activated ability where we pay 1 colorless, and permanents our opponents control lose hexproof and indestructible. So if our opponents decide to save their board from like a Wrath of God, all we have to do is pay 1 colorless and their board gets blown up as well. Now we have Sword of Feast and Famine. This is a very powerful sword. The equipped creature is going to get +2/+2 protection from black and green. And then when the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player is going to discard their hand and we untap all of our lands. Now we have the Great Henge. This is a very, very powerful artifact. Even though it does cost 9 mana, the Great Henge is going to cost X less, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control. We can activate this to add 2 green mana and gain 2 life. And then whenever any non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, we're going to put a +1 counter on it and draw a card. Okay, let's get into the instance. First up is Court of Calling. That way we can go get whatever creature we want. Our Worldly Tutor. So we can go get whatever creature we want. Our Enlightened Tutor. That way we can go get any artifact or enchantment we want. Now we have Return of the Wild Speaker. If we control a very high-powered creature, we're going to be drawing a lot of cards. Or if we developed a very large board with a lot of smaller creatures, we're going to give all those creatures +3/+3. Now, to protect all that we're trying to do, we have Heroic Intervention and Teferi's Protection. Okay, let's get into the sorceries. Most of these sorceries are ramp spells, obviously. So we have Cultivate, Kadama's Reach, Explosive Vegetation. Now we have Green Sun Zenith. This is going to go get whatever green creature we want, put it on the battlefield, and Green Sun Zenith is going to shuffle back in. That way we can continually draw Green Sun and continually get out as many green creatures as possible. Now we have a very powerful one with Last March of the Ents. It can't be countered, but we're going to draw cards equal to the greatest toughness among creatures we control, and then we get to put any number of creature cards from our hand on the battlefield. Okay, let's get into the land base. We have our Command Tower, Exotic Orchard. We got our fetch lands with Windswept Heath, Flooded Strand, Misty Rainforest, Fabled Passage. Now we need the lands to go get with these fetch lands. So we have Sparrow's Headquarters, our Temple Garden, Breeding Pool, Hallowed Fountain. Now we have our fetchable Surveil lands. The Surveil lands are very good. So we have Hedge Maze, Meticulous Archive, Lush Portico. Now we have our Battle Bond lands. So we have Bountiful Promenade, Sea of Clouds, Rejuvenating Springs. Now we have our 3 Karoo lands. A Karoo land is a land that's going to enter tapped, and when it enters, we have to return a land we control back to our hand. So we have Azorius Chancery, Simic Growth Chamber, and Celestia Sanctuary. What makes these lands very unique is if we control Amulet of Vigor, the return a land back to our hand is a trigger. So we can put that trigger on the stack. So with Amulet of Vigor out, one of these lands is going to enter. It's going to trigger the Amulet of Vigor. So we'll have the ability to untap it, float 2 mana, and then the bounce trigger is going to resolve. So we can bounce itself back to our hand. So we're actually netting more mana. Now we have some very fun, unique lands. So we have our Windbrisk Heights. These are called hideaway lands. When this land enters the battlefield, we get to look at the top 4 cards, exile one of them face down, and if you meet the requirements, you can pay its activation cost and then play the exile card without paying its mana cost. In this case, all we have to do is attack with 3 or more creatures, If we did that, we pay 1 white, we get to activate it and cast the card that we exiled. Similar to that, we have Mossword Bridge. This one is a little bit easier to activate because all we need is total power of 10, which is not hard to do at all in this deck. Now we have Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth. Every single land is going to be a forest in addition to its other types. So if we have Nissa who shakes the world, all our lands are forests, they're going to produce a additional green mana. And that seems pretty good. Now we have Lotus Field. This is going to be a very powerful land for us. When it enters, yeah, we do have to sacrifice 2 lands, but it'll add 3 mana of 1 color. But if we have Kiora, we can untap this. So ultimately, we can produce 6 mana with 1 land. And that's going to be really fun. You could even go one step further and enchant Lotus Field with either Utopia Sprawl or Fertile Ground and have 1 land that can potentially produce 4, even 5 mana. And that's pretty impressive. Now we have Rogue's Passage. This is going to ensure that any creature is unblockable. We have 4 plains, 4 islands, and 6 forests. And that was the Commander deck tech for Helga, Skittish, Seer. I really hope you guys enjoyed this all-in ramp deck. If you guys have any suggestions, let me know in the comments below. I'll have the Moxfield link in the comments as well. So be sure to like, comment, subscribe, follow me on TikTok, share these videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.